All right, you guys, we're back with episode 2 of Wilderness Part 2, and we are back in Numbers.
Yep.
And
still in Numbers.
Still
not back. We never left.
That's true. We haven't left. Much like the Israelites, we're sitting tight.
Dying in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah, but hopefully learning a few things along the way.
So you got to start with the setup.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So it's a wilderness series. If you're not there, if you're not in the wilderness at the moment, you will be. So just hold on. Wilderness is where God reveals your heart. He's where he brings transformation, invites you to prepare for what he's going to do next. So it's a season of change. And in some of our conversations that we've had online and offline, this gives us the vocabulary to talk about those challenging moments because communally, we're not necessarily in a actual wilderness experience. It's easy to be stuck in the wilderness and nobody knows it. Mm-hmm. So doing this series and walking through it and talking about the Israelites really gives us the ability to say, man, I feel like I'm in the wilderness.
Right.
I'm lost.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And the other piece is what God has taken the Israelites out of Egypt. Now he's getting Egypt out of the Israelites. And every single story that we read along the way, God is teaching them how he will relate with them, shaping that relationship, whether they learn it or not. And then you go forward. Mm-hmm. So last week, they decided not to go into the promised land.
Right.
So they get to stay in the wilderness and die for the next 40 years. But their children are going to go in. Yeah. So the mind shift for me was when they left Egypt, heading towards the promised land, maybe they thought they were going in. Now they know they're not going in, but they are raising the generation that will go in.
Yeah.
So
obviously not everybody handles that really well. So we have kind of the next thing we've got.
But we do. Always.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, that's right.
We would never do this.
Never.
But Korah, we see
that name's available for folks. For their children.
There's a lot of Joshuas and Caleb's.
Not a lot of Korahs. Not a lot of Dathans.
Not a lot of Korahs.
No.
But he doesn't kind of take kindly to this and gets a rebellion, and we see God is going to handle it.
Numbers chapter 16. Korah, Dathan, and 250 Israelite men decide Moses has too much power.
Right.
And so let's confront him. And they do. And God says to Moses and Aaron, just back up because I'm going to just smoke them. Mm-hmm. Right. So it seems to be God's response a lot of times in all of this.
Yeah.
But they see all of the power vested in the hands of Moses and Aaron. They're speaking on behalf of God. God is speaking on behalf of them, and they want it. But they don't know what they want.
Right.
So this is kind of the moments where God creates the priesthood, how he's going to interact with humanity or really interface with his people.
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah. And I know that can sound harsh where it's like 15,000 of them wiped out with the snap of a finger. But God gave them time and time again. And this is a direct challenge to God's authority. And he is doing something. He's doing it through Moses and Aaron. He's got a plan. And this is a kind of that direct retaliation against it, and God, he's going to handle it. So it can seem harsh, but also, God is not a God of chaos. God's a God of authority and order, and he's establishing what he's going to do here.
Yeah, could you imagine being the group that says that sees all these miracles happen, and they're like, you know what? You know who the problem is? The problem's with Moses. Like you'd think they would attack somebody else at some point, right? But that's once again we do the same thing.
Sure.
So God sorts it out. He deals with them.
Yeah.
And in this part of what we struggle with always, you'll hear people say constantly, I just love the God of the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And the God of the Old Testament, I just can't understand. It's the same. God is the same. So we need to reconcile and try and understand what's unfolding in these moments. A little fact you can't get around. When they knew they were no longer going into the promised land, if you just took the lower of the estimates of how many people would have been there, it's 1.2 million people, 40 years. Just do some quick math, 80-something funerals a day as they died. Now, I'm sure they didn't all die on one day. So when God comes along and wipes out 3,000 or 4,000 or 100,000 or whatever it was that he dealt with, they were used to death. He was weeding them out. They weren't going in anyways. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't matter and they should smite them, but God had a different way of dealing with people. If you weren't going to be a part of preparing and understanding and being in this process, he didn't have time. He just moved them out of the way, and he moved on with the people that would go forward with the process. So I don't. Maybe he was buying them some time without funerals. Just get rid of 3,000 a day, and you can have two. No,
there you go. He might have
100%.
Maybe. So we're gonna be teaching from 17 a little bit into 18 priesthood, and this is a big thing and a big deal. And I know you had a lot of thoughts on just what this looked like and kind of how that continues on, and authority that Jesus gave, and just that order. Again, it's not just wake up and do whatever you want. There was a way to interact with God. It started here at the tabernacle, and it started with the priests.
Yeah. So the creation of the priesthood. There's a line at the end of the end of our reading, which is Numbers 18, verse 7, where he says, "I give you the priesthood as a gift. Any outsider who approaches shall be put to death." The sacred things of God. If God is righteous and there is no sin in him, and then all of a sudden sin enters into his presence, like you couldn't just wake up and say, you know what, I think I'm going into the tabernacle today. Didn't work that way. One of the things I've heard you say, and we have in these conversations, is I'm so glad to be on this side of the cross because Jesus now is our mediator. So much of what we just came through in the Easter season and all of those stories are being foreshadowed here, right? But now that we have Jesus as paying that ultimate price for sin, right? We love to say we love the grace of God, but we don't like the judgment of God. Well, the judgment of God, he didn't even relent on his own son. He put that payment for sin on his own son. He willingly took it for us. So all of this points towards Jesus, the cost that's going to be made. But the creation of the priesthood, you can imagine God as being some old man that sits on a cloud somewhere that wants nothing to do with us. Or what these stories teach us is that God wants to interface and be in relationship with us. So he has to create the priesthood who is responsible for handling the sacred spaces, the moments of worship. And that's what they do. So, but he tells them, you've got to handle it correctly or it's going to be on you. So it's a pretty heavy burden, right? So he gives them the Levitical tribe that's to take care of some of the stuff, but then your family and your direct descendants are going to be in the Holy of Holies, and we're going to figure out how to work this next piece out. So if parts are done wrong, they'll be to blame. If parts are done wrong, you'll be to blame. And you've got a responsibility to handle it. But that's that creating of the priesthood.
Yeah. And the symbolism with the staff, Aaron's staff, the dead wood that buds and brings life, and I think you said it was in fruitfulness.
Yeah,
and we see a lot of cool symbolism.
Dead thing coming back to life.
Yeah, and even just that staff, we know Moses is very connected to his staff and the rod and that authority of God. We see that, and we see him use it to, they would have used it to tend sheep. They would have used it. He lifted it up on, that became the serpent and back to the staff. Like we see so much in that I think is interesting.
Everything is symbolic, man.
It is.
Right? Yeah. A part of our conversation we were laughing about is we'll make up a sermon about anything 100% maybe. We'll never fully understand that. Yeah. Like biblical scholars love to say the fruitfulness, and it not only bore flowers, it also bore ripe almonds overnight. Clear message of life from a rod that had been dead and that Aaron had probably been carrying around for a long time.
Yeah.
So God just revealing and showing and allowing them to see the purpose and the plan. I don't know what you do with that.
Right. The tabernacle, I think, is an interesting piece, being a worship leader and just understanding that piece. Of course, the Levitical tribe they were the worship leaders too. Part of them, I mean, the singers, they were the psalm writers. They would have written songs to the story of Israel and God's people, and the detail. If you go back into Exodus when they're building the tabernacle, which was the dwelling place of God, how he could dwell with his people, you see that, just like you said, God wants to be with his people. And you see the detail. It wasn't just, hey, build something for me, guys. This is...
hang out.
Oh, man. This is such detail in what was to come.
And so much of it, it's onerous. It feels like a burden. God did that so that we could be in relationship with him. So you do this, you do this, you do this, and maybe now we look back and we're like, oh, the blood, the this, the that. But it was so that we could actually be in relationship with God. So there was so much about that once again foreshadows Christ. The big what for in all of this, I think we get we get to the point in this message where, man, teaching it, chapter 17 is only 13 verses long. They're very short. It's all story. So it's hard to teach.
Right.
Because you have to draw the symbolism out. So I try to relate to what does the priesthood then look like the priesthood now?
Right.
It's completely different. But there's some similarities. So if Jesus became our high priest, the one that mediates for us, so we can now boldly approach the throne of grace. They could not have done that because they did not have Jesus with the sacrifice being made. So now we do. So do we just abandon this whole thing? Am I of the Levitical tribe? I am not. But when Jesus left, he left us with apostles. He left us with a system of discipleship and training. And so there was a structure to the early church. And I think it's so funny that this whole thing started off with a rebellion of people who look at Moses and like, why do you get all the power?
Right.
And we still see today that the search for power and significance oftentimes, this is why Moses, man, a study of Moses in that time, it'll blow your brain, because in that part of antiquity, if you were a person that wielded this much influence and this much power, you would be a king. People would appoint you as king. Moses wanted nothing to do with it. In fact, he's one of the first that doesn't turn himself into a king. If you looked at some of the other subsets of people around, they instantly became kings, and then their lineage became kings after them.
Yeah.
Moses doesn't set himself up at that. He became the mediator and as between God and the people. That's how he set himself up. So it really is the picture. Moses becomes it's problematic. This is a podcast and we're just talking about it, right?
Yeah.
So he kind of sets himself up as more symbolic of what we are today, helping people to connect, helping people to interface, interpreting. There's no power in Scott, but Scott, just like Moses, can get himself disqualified maybe in some ways. Moses, later on, we're going to study this story down the road where God tells him to speak to the rock and he strikes the rock.
Right.
So maybe he should have just gone on and not waited for the 40 years to go by. So he disqualifies himself. I don't know. There's a lot in this.
Yeah. Can you talk about the contents of what would have been in the ark?
The ark?
Yeah. The ark and just what you made, because this is so cool.
So a lot around this. I don't know if this is going to be in the sermon, but I think it bears mentioning. When you look at the contents of the ark, you've got the manna that was connected. You've got Aaron's rod, which is here, and you've got the tablets. And it's easy to look at those things and say, those are all powerful moments of God so they can remember the things that God did. They're also failings of Israel. So they whined, they fussed, they complained. God gave them the manna, told them to collect it, and it really spoke of that. But it's a picture of their complaining in the wilderness. The tablets, he comes down the mountain, they've created an idol, he throws the tablets on the ground, and he breaks them.
Yeah.
Put them in the ark. The Aaron's rod is to break the rebellion. They put it all in the Ark of the Covenant, and if you study the Ark of the Covenant, it is sealed with the two angels or the cherubim on either side, and it becomes the mercy seat. So the failings, the sin of humanity, then covered by the blood of the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
Kat talked about it a little bit in the resurrection story with the cherub or the angels in the tomb, sitting over the mercy seat where the blood had been shed. There's so many different connections to that and the sins of humanity being covered. So I think everything that God does in the Old Testament would have been very real for them because they were living it out, but always foreshadows what God is going to do in the future. And this rod is just one of those things, that the priesthood that's created. Doesn't mean that the priests have some crazy power. They have a responsibility.
Right.
And their responsibility is to protect those sacred things and help people connect to God. And somehow we're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
And reconcile it today.
Yeah. I think that last thought you mentioned, and I think this is something that you had said, that, they were not, we kind of think of them as moving around a lot in the wilderness, they're constantly moving, but the land wouldn't have really sustained that
There's
many
nowhere
people.
to move to.
Yeah, so if you kind of closer study, there's probably only a couple places they moved from, and a lot of it was stationary in that. And we see the tabernacle kind of foreshadowing what becomes the temple, which eventually gets destroyed, and the veil is torn, and all these things that Jesus kind of comes to make right and to make the new covenant that we have through Jesus. And Jesus is not saying, hey, the place of worship, like he's saying, go to the people. They're not going to come to you. You go to them.
Yeah. The tabernacle was never intended to be the only place, right? If the ultimate goal was that we become the temple and that through his sacrifice, once again, we can be in that daily walk relationship with God, and our bodies become the temple of God, then that's what we were shadowing. That's what we were moving towards. Every one of these steps along the way show the progression. You can get stuck in the space, or you can understand the message and the story that's unfolding. All of them were desert experiences. All of them were growth moments. And there were people who got it, and there were people who didn't, right? It's a lot. It's a lot. But you're right. The message of Jesus was so different than here, because as God was preparing the Israelites for this journey, they gave them the law. You have the tabernacle, then you have the people, and the interface is in the middle, right? So you have to have all of those things together. They understood that the righteousness of God and what that looks like. And then the tabernacle and the priests would govern how that relationship would be handled so that they could spend time in the presence of God. And then ultimately that moves forward as we move on in, and Jesus saying it's not about come here and see, it's about go.
Right.
And you've heard me say this in messages before. God never commanded the world to come to church. He commanded the church to go to the world. So maybe where the Israelites stayed and made it all about the temple, maybe still making it about the temple, God is trying to reveal himself to the world, and he's sending us out to be a light.
Yeah.
Somewhere in all of that is a message.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Huh. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. You'll figure it out.
Let's play this.
Yeah. There we go. We could do that. I love the symbolism. I love the connection to our faith past, and we're sitting here as a result of what God continued on through the people, through his son, and now we get to be on this side of it. It's awesome.
I think the struggle for me, it'd be nice to not be a preacher some days. Forget the word preacher. That preacher's a terrible word. That's where we take pastor and teacher and mash them together to be a pastor. There's a responsibility in this that's pretty heavy. Right. And sometimes you get a little cocky about it, or you get a little different areas. There's a responsibility that goes along with this that doesn't necessarily come along with the prominence of, hey, so that sits differently, because there's a governing of what we do to try and honor and care for the things of God while introducing people to God, and doing that in a way so that we're not portraying a God that is not God. I look at the theology that we've given to people, and I say, well, we're thinking with that. Like, that's just crazy. It doesn't recognize God at all. So all of us, we've got to carry this in a way that I think is helpful for people, but also is truth. So I love the calling that God's given. He's not calling me to be a priest in Israel, but he's called me to be a pastor, and to carry that mantle, and to do it in a way that hopefully represents him well. So you listen. Maybe a different version of the priesthood, leading worship.
It was
helping people move into the presence of God. It's maybe a little bit different how it shows up, but same responsibility.
Absolutely, same weight for sure.
Yeah. It's fun, dude.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll get the message there somewhere. Then come Sunday and find out. Does he get his message written?
Maybe on Sunday.